Okay, Boker Tov. We're a couple of minutes late today. The reason for that is because, and the sound quality might not be as good as it was the last couple of weeks. I had a great suggestion by someone to get a mic that connects to the phone, which I got, and somehow I must have misplaced the part that the receiver. In other words, I still have the mic. The mic is right here, but the receiver to the phone I must have misplaced, and I spent time looking for it. I can't find it. My desk is a mess, and hopefully when I clean up my desk I'll be able to find it. So the sound quality will not be as great. I'll try to speak a little louder. Okay, let's start as we usually do with a bracha on the coffee. The title of the class does thoughts and prayer, ? Should we stop thoughts and prayers? Does that trigger you? Does that annoy you? That's become a bit of an issue. It's an issue to some, and I'm going to elaborate now. This is a Torah class, and today we're going to have some nice ideas, Torah learning, and its application as Torah. As often said in this class, Torah is a guide to life. Its application will address this issue of, perhaps how to avoid thoughts and prayers, as I will explain. So first, let's start with a bracha. Let's start with a blessing. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Shehakol Nihiya Bidvaro. So, I know it's been an issue, as I just mentioned, with regards to the tragic shooting. And this class is somewhat a bit of a continuation, but not totally, to last week's class, or 2 weeks ago, because last week was Shavuos, so we didn't have class. But it's a Torah class on this past week's Parsha, and its application of which we like to always take a lesson and apply it to the issues of the day. And we're still very much under the influence of some of the violence that continues to happen here in this country and its solutions. So while that's an important issue, I want to teach Torah and then see how it can apply to some of these issues. So let's get straight to it. In the Parsha of the week that we just read this past week, which the name of the Parsha is Parshas Naso. It's in Numbers, in Bamidbar. And much of the beginning, of course, deals with counting the tribes of Israel, counting the Levites, and so on. And in the Parsha, we have the following law. I'm going to read the holy words of God first in the Hebrew, then I will read it in the English, then I will share some of the commentaries, and then I will apply its lesson to some of the issues of the day, or at least the issue of the day that we're discussing over here, related to sort of thoughts and prayers. Is that the best response to the situation that we find ourselves as a society? How to avoid, prevent. So all this will come up in this discussion. But let's learn some Torah. Let's learn some of the Parsha. Okay. So l'chaim on the coffee, and let's get to it. So the Torah over here discusses the following law. This is in Numbers, and I'm reading both in Hebrew and then in the English. So here the Torah tells us, V'chol truma l'chol kodshe b'nei Yisrael asher yakrivu la Cohen lo yihiyeh. Translation, verse 9, every offering from all the children of Israel's holy first fruits brought to the priest will belong to the priest. Okay? And it is, according to some, also referring, I believe, to Truma, but here, let me explain what Bikurim is. Bikurim is, as he says, the first fruits. When you worked hard, you sowed, you worked the field, which is a lot of hard work. The first fruits has to be brought to the Holy Temple, and it's given as a gift to the Kohanim. In a broader sense, there's other gifts that the Kohanim get. There's the truma, a certain percentage, a small percentage of your produce has to be given to the Kohen. There's the maisros, the meiser, which is the 10%. Various different laws to these gifts that God dedicated as granted to the Kohanim via the children of Israel. Now, then the verse says, "Ve'ish." I'm again reading the Hebrew. "Ve'ish et kadashav lo yihiyu, isha sheyitem laKohen lo yihiyeh." Translation: the prerogative. Sorry, that's in the parentheses. A person, his holy gifts is his own. A person is his own. Whatever a man gives to the priest is then. So this is the translation. Now I'm going to read it with some of the parentheses, which tries to give a little bit clarity to this verse. The prerogative of precisely which priest or Levite, end of parentheses, a person, parentheses again, chooses to give, his holy gifts is his own, but whatever a man gives to the priest is then the priest's. So let me explain a little bit over here, going away from the literal translation. So the verse says, "Ve'ish et kadashav lo yihiyu." A man, I'm giving you the literal translation, a man, his kadashav, his holy gifts, lo yihiyu, should be to him. What does it mean his gifts should be to him? That seems a little strange, because it's not to him, it's actually to the Cohen, to the priest, descendants of Aaron, that he has to give it to. So what does it mean, Ve'ish es kadashav, and a man, his kadashim, his holy produce, that which he set aside to give as the Kohanim, which then becomes holy, lo yiyu, should be to him. It would seem to be more accurate to say it's not to him, he has to give it away. So therefore we have various commentaries that explain what this verse means. And in the parentheses, he's quoting from the Ober commentary from Rashi that says, what does it mean, Ve'ish et kadashav lo yihiyu, that a man, his holy gifts are to him? It means the following. It means that he has the right to choose which Kohen to give it to. In the language of Chazal, the language of our sages, it's called Tovat Hana'ah, the pleasure of deciding who to give this tova, who to give this gift to. So to further explain, this by contrasting it to another gifts that we have to give to, not to the Kohen, but to the poor. Part of the gifts that the Torah, that the Bible gives to the poor, is when you are going ahead and you are harvesting your field, so there is various parts of that field that the Torah mandates you leave for the poor. So to give you an example, Peah, the Torah says that Peah, the corner of the field, and exactly what defines the corner, again, is defined in Talmud and Jewish law. The corner of the field has to be given to the poor. But here the Torah says, La'ani v'la'ager ta'azov otam, to the ani, to the poor person, and to the proselyte, you should leave this produce, meaning you have no right to decide, even though it's your field. The poor people enter the field and they take. You have no right to decide, okay, you could have it and you can't, or I prefer to give it to this poor person because I like him, or whatever it is. Everybody has equal rights, and you are not allowed to prevent anyone from going ahead and taking from this produce. By contrast, here the Torah is telling you that when it comes to cheruma, this particular gift and percentage of your produce that you have to give to the Kohen or to the Levi, the Levite, here you have a right to choose who to give it to. And that's how they explain the verse, Ve'ish et kadashav lo yiyu. A man, his holy set aside produce belongs to him, in the sense that he has a right to choose who to give it to. I hope that's clear. That is one of the explanations that Rashi brings from the Talmud and from the Medrash of how to interpret this verse. I hope you're with me up to now. Now, let's go a little further. Let's continue. There is another explanation over here in Rashi, and Rashi brings Ve'ishet kadashav lo yihiyu, says Rashi the following. Rashi says, and again, Rashi usually takes from the earlier sources, he says, Ve'ishet kadashav kama lo yihiyu. Ve'ishet kadashav, if a person withholds giving the gifts to the poor, in this case to the Cohen, lo yihiyu, it's going to be on him. Meaning that the next year, his crop will only produce 1/10 of what it produced this year. In other words, that when you withhold the gifts that God has, if you withhold from the blessing that God has given you, if you withhold the mandated gifts from the Cohen and the Levite, you're actually holding it back from yourself. You think you are earning. You think you are gaining by not giving it to the Cohen that you are meant to support. Tells you the Torah, lo yiyu. The loss is not going to be to the Cohen. The loss is going to be to you. By preventing those mandated gifts, you're going to incur the loss. There is a analogy given to this in the Medrash, I believe, where it talks about this concept and then uses the following sort of story / analogy. It says that a landowner, a field owner, had huge, large fields, and he had a worker that he hired, and he made up to give him a percentage. Let's say he made up to give him 10% of whatever the field produces. At the end of the year, they're putting together this successful large crop, and they put it into bundles, and they start to count the bundles. And the owner says, okay, let's count the bundles. And to make the process sort of simpler, for every bundle, he puts aside a penny. He puts aside a buck or $1, whatever it is. And later they're going to count up all the dollars. So let's say it adds up to, let's say, $1,000. Then he knows that he gets 10% of the bundles, which are worth far more than the $1,000. It was just $1 per bundle or a penny per bundle, just so that they could later count, easier to add it up. Okay, so every bundle, they'll throw a bundle, put down a penny. Throw a bundle, put down a penny. At one point, this worker, goes ahead, and he notices that the owner, as he's putting down the pennies and throwing the bundles, notices that the owner is distracted. So he says, now is my opportunity, now is my chance. And he grabs a handful of pennies and he puts it in his pocket and he says, oh, I just earned, 50 pennies or $50. So we could understand how silly and how foolish this worker is, because who is he really stealing from? He's stealing from himself, because every penny put aside represents a bundle, and every bundle is worth $100. So the same analogy the Medrash says is that when you decide to withhold the mandated gifts that God has instructed us to give to the poor or to the Cohen and to the Levi, you think you're grabbing a handful of pennies, but really each penny that you're withholding it represents great blessing that you will get in return, and therefore you're essentially stealing from yourself. So that's another explanation that Rashi gives on this verse, Ve'ishes kadashav lo yihiyu. I hope that's clear. I hope you're still following over here. L'chaim. Okay, let's continue. And even if you lost me until now, you could join me over here. Then after this discussion, after this verse in the Torah continues with a very famous law, very famous directive, known as the Parshas Shel HaSota, the Parsha of the Sota. Books were written about this. The Sota saga, where I will explain in a moment, not the whole story of the Sota, because that's not the focus of this class. But let's read the Parsha itself, and I will translate. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lamer, and God spoke to Moses, so to say. Again, this is in Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. The Torah continues and says, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, V'amarta aleim, and you should say to them, Ish ish kisiste ishta yumole mal. What happens, a person who his wife has deviated from the path of sort of loyalty, the path of righteousness, and she umala b'mal, she went ahead and she was disloyal to him. And the Torah goes on to discuss some of the conditions and the details of how, in that situation, the husband, in the days of the tabernacle and the Bet HaMikdash, would bring his wife to the Bet HaMikdash, and she would be given the waters to drink, the water from the holy basin, and if she was guilty, then both her, and as the Talmud of the Medrash states, both her and the one who committed adultery with her would die in this very unpleasant way. And that's the story of the Sota very, very briefly. A wife that's the husband suspects, based on valid reasons, to be disloyal. He would bring her to the Beis HaMikdash. They would perform this procedure, and if actually she was innocent, then she would be blessed with beautiful children, and so on and so forth. But again, here I'm not focusing so much on the discussion of the Sota in its detail, perhaps at a different opportunity. But here Rashi says the following. Okay, I'm going to again read the Rashi because it's always beautiful to hear the original holy words of our great sages. So Rashi tells us the following. Bear with me, let me turn the page. Okay. Says Rashi, Ish kisiste ishto. This is the heading of the Rashi. And then Rashi says the following, Ma katuv lema'ala min ha'inyan. What does it say in the verse right before we come to this Torah portion about the wayward wife, the rebelling, or the loyal wife? So it says that, what did we learn before? What did we read before? Ve'ishes kadashav lo yihiyu. That a man, if he withholds the gifts to the Cohen, lo yihiyu, it will actually be, it will turn on him, it will hurt him, as we just explained. So Rashi continues and says like this: Imata ma'akev matnas haKohen. If you withhold the gifts from the Kohen, if you withhold the gifts from the Kohen, chayecha, by your life, that's like an oath. Shetitztarech lavoi etzloi lahavalei asasoita. That by your life, it's an oath that you're going to have to bring him the sota. You're going to have to. There will be disloyalty in your home. There will be disharmony in your home, and you're going to have to come to the Kohen regardless by bringing him the sota. So Rashi continues what he said before. If you're going to come, not going to bring to the Kohen the gifts that you're supposed to bring to him, says the juxtaposition, the message over here of the story of the sota tells us that in addition to the punishment that we mentioned, that your own produce will be diminished because you're withholding the gifts of to the poor and to the Kohen and so on, but in addition, you're going to end up coming to the Kohen. But let me tell you how you're going to end up coming to the Kohen. You're going to end up coming to the Kohen with problems, with serious problems in the peacefulness of your home. What's the connection? So at the surface level, the connection is, there's a concept in Torah called measure for measure. Measure for measure. In Hebrew, it's called midah keneged midah. The way God sort of punishes us, in quotations, as will be explained, is measure for measure. You didn't come to the Kohen when you were supposed to, I'll make you come to the Kohen with problems. And that's the sort of simple understanding over here, or the basic understanding, but there are some questions that we immediately have. A question that we have is there some sort of thematic connection, meaning I didn't come to the Kohen, you bought to the Kohen with the sota. I could have come to the Kohen for many other things. Why specifically the sota? And why would the wife sort of be at fault here, that somehow, because I withheld my gifts to the Kohen, the wife is suspected of being disloyal, and I'm coming to the Kohen? There must be some deeper meaning or deeper understanding over here. So let me attempt to explain that. Talking about just a side personal story, talking about measure for measure. It sort of reminds me of a personal story. It's a personal story that happened a number of years ago. My stepdad was in the hospital. He had a heart attack. He was here for a holiday, and he had a heart attack. And so he was in the hospital. What is it called? The Heart Institute on Oakland and 441. I don't recall exactly the name of the hospital. And he spent a couple of days in the hospital. And I did whatever I can to make sure that he's well taken care of. And he was treated very well in the hospital. And while I spent their days with him, I spent some of my time going to the nurse's station. And at the nurse's station, there's always a list of all the patients that are in the various rooms on the floor of the hospital. And I looked at the names, and as a rabbi, I focused in on the Jewish names, the Jewish sounding names, although I would be glad to help anybody that's there, Jewish or non-Jewish, but I felt that the Jewish patients would appreciate my stopping by and maybe saying a prayer with them. So I went from room to room where, to maybe give some words of encouragement, maybe put on the tefillin with some, whatever it might be. And then I went back to my father's room because we were expecting the doctor to come and give us a report. So I went back to my father's room, and a woman follows me into the room and says, "Rabbi, would you be able to please come and visit?" I believe she said my brother. It could be she said my son, could be my brother. I'm going to stick with my brother over here. This goes back a number of years. It's probably, 6-7 years ago. So, but she said, "Would you please come in?" Apparently I missed, maybe their name wasn't as Jewish sounding, whatever it is. Apparently I missed that particular room. But regardless, again, Jewish or not Jewish, I'm glad to be of help. And so I said, sure. I walked into the room, and the fellow over there sitting in the patient was a sort of a heavy set fellow. You could see he was sort of breathing, he was strenuously. He was struggling with breathing. And a relatively younger fellow, must have been probably in his 30s. And he asks the others who were there were 2 or 3 family members, if they could please go out of the room because he wants to talk to the rabbi privately. Fine, sure. They walk out of the room. And he says to me, I feel that I'm being punished. I'm being punished. Why am I being punished? Because although I'm not religious, I'm not an observant individual, I'm not religious, but I still make a point every year, Yom Kippur, to go to synagogue. Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, I make a point to go to the synagogue. This year, he had some grievance. I don't know if he had some grievance with the synagogue leadership. I don't recall exactly, but I remember that he had some grievance. And he said, I did not go to synagogue this year. And I think that this is God's way of punishing me, and that's why I'm here with heart. I need to have open heart surgery, and that's why I am over here. And that's sort of his confession to the rabbi. I mean, although there is a form of confession in Judaism, there definitely is, but it's a confession directly to God. You don't need to confess to the rabbi. It's not the Jewish way. But nevertheless, he somehow wanted to get it off his chest. So I said to him, look, I'm not here to, I'm not God, and I do not know that you're being punished for that. That's between you and God, and I'm not sure that that's the way sort of God operates. What I will say to you is that the way we approach these things is that when we have a certain illness, a physical illness, we look for the mitzvah, we look for the spiritual counterpart, we strengthen that, and that's what we do in order to, in addition to the medical care, of course, we also focus on the spiritual counterpart, and we try to enhance and improve in that mitzvah. And therefore, since you're having issues with your heart, I would have you ever put on tefillin, and would you, tefillin, which is the phylacteries that we put opposite the heart, as the Torah says, that you have to put it on your arm opposite the heart and on your head, and therefore, I suggest that we do so. And he has never put on tefillin before in his life, interestingly enough. So we put on tefillin, and I said to him that what I would like you to do is to make a commitment that, God willing, when you recover and you get out of the hospital, that you commit that we meet and we're going to put on tefillin, which he readily did. So I'm triggered. My memory's triggered by this story because it was like a common understanding from this fellow that measure for measure. He didn't come to synagogue, so somehow God is punishing him that he's having all these heart issues. But as I said before the story, there has to be a little bit more connection over here. So one of the commentaries, and I heard this from a Parsha podcast today, there's just so much material out there that you can discuss and so on, that you could listen to, not discuss, that you could listen to. There's so much information on Torah classes, podcasts, YouTube, just galore. So I heard this on a podcast, a Parsha podcast, given by Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg from Boca Raton, and he quoted one of the commentaries, and I don't recall which commentary he said this in the name of, but he said an interesting commentary, and that relates to our discussion and our title over here in today's class. He says the sort of thematic connection over here is the following. The reason why we need to give gifts, to the Cohen, is because what is the role of the Cohen? The Cohen's role, as the Torah tells us, especially in Deuteronomy, is the Cohen's role is to bring holiness and spirituality, to uplift the nation from its mundane activities or mundane pursuits, or being stuck just sort of in the mundane, and to lift it up into a more spiritual, holy society, individual, family, etc. In other words, you have to, of course, be involved in worldly and work and social activities and so on. But as a human being, there's two parts to us, and in order to be a proper human being, we need to cultivate and to live life in harmony by both having our sort of godly soul, our neshama, and our more materialistic side in harmony and directed in a more sort of spiritual and uplifted way of life. The one who is tasked with doing so biblically is the Cohen. The Cohen is the representative that was totally dedicated to the Holy Temple, and in return, when you had questions and teachings that were needed in terms of rulings that were needed, was the Cohen. The coming and bringing the gifts to the Cohen was an appreciation, but it was also an additional way of interacting with the Cohen, which would in turn inspire you to live a more sort of both more noble and more spiritual and holy life. So the person who holds back the gifts to the Cohen, in essence, is saying, I don't want to give the gifts to the Cohen. I don't want to have anything to do with the Cohen. I don't need him in my life. My life is good without him and what he represents. By doing so, the entire atmosphere in the home starts to decline. When the atmosphere in the home starts to decline, and this usual spiritual and holy environment that comes from being connected to the Cohen, and in the larger sense, what he represents, Torah study, prayer, and so on, the entire atmosphere of the home declines. You become influenced by the outside atmosphere, which atmosphere devoid of holiness and Torah is unfortunately much more animalistic, and any temptations goes. As a result, says Rashi, you will have to bring, your family will have to come to the Cohen. There will be serious shalom bayis, peace of the home. There will be tension in the home. There will be an environment that is not the sort of the structure that God wants for our home. The result being, in other words, it's not a punishment. It's not God is saying, you're not giving to the Kohen. Well, you're gonna have to come to the Kohen some way or somehow. It is a natural consequence. If this is the way you choose your life, naturally you'll be pulled down by your more animalistic sort of base nature. The result of that will be serious problems in the home, as well as other problems. That's the deeper understanding, the deeper meaning over here. There's a letter from the Rebbe. There's a letter from the Rebbe. This was written the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and with this letter and final message, we will conclude this class. There's a letter from the Rebbe where, in the 1950s, I believe this was, the letter is printed in Likutei Sichot, where there was a group of ladies from Kfar Chabad. Kfar Chabad it literally means the Chabad village, but it's quite a large city today. A Chabad city that was established in the probably late 40s or early 50s. And there was a group of women who wrote a letter to the Rebbe complaining that the men on Shabbat afternoon remain in the synagogue to pray a little bit longer, to pray and to study, and then they sit down to fabreng. Some of you know what a fabrengen is, some of you don't. A fabrengen is where you say a little l'chaim and you sit down and you inspire each other. You talk, you sort of elaborate on that which you have studied, and you put it down into practical words, and you encourage each other. And there's like a camaraderie and a holiness that is present at a proper fabrengen. So they wrote this letter to the Rebbe complaining that Shabbat afternoon, where the husband should be home and have a Shabbat meal and be with the family, they're not there, and they're complaining to the Rebbe that he should tell his Hasidim, who both the men and women were Hasidim, were followers and disciples of the Rebbe, that they should come home on Shabbat afternoon earlier so they could have a proper Shabbat family experience. So this is what the Rebbe answered. The Rebbe said to them the following. The Rebbe said, both these concerns are valid. The concern that you have that there should be a family Shabbat, so there's a proper spirit of holiness and Shabbat celebration with the father at home, is a very, very valid concern and necessity. At the same time, a fabrengen and spending time in the synagogue in an uplifted, inspiring way, as to uplift yourself from the week that you just came and to prepare for the rest of the week. That it shouldn't just be a time when you pursue materialism and wealth and get carried away with the gashmias, we say in Hebrew, with just the gashmias, the physicality, the mundaneness of the world, and which is a far cry from a more holy spiritual environment. A fabrengen on Shabbat with friends is very important. So this was the Rebbe's solution in the letter. The Rebbe says, I propose that you should alternate. One Shabbat should be designated where the husbands are totally dedicated to holiness and uplifting themselves, and in turn, this will affect the home and the family. And the next Shabbat they come home. So they should alternate. They should alternate where there's one Shabbat where they totally immerse themselves. They don't have to worry about time. They are totally there. And then the next Shabbat, they bring that spirit of holiness to the family. This was the suggestion or the solution that the Rebbe wrote to the family. In other words, that having the Kohen and what it represents as part of your life is essential to who we are. Now, It's essential to live life as the way God wants us to live life. A life of a human being imbued with holiness, imbued with purpose, imbued with bringing that holiness and purpose to our family. And this is where I'm now going to apply it to the original question of thoughts and prayers. And there have been those that after, tragically, the shooting and violence, we don't need your thoughts and prayers. Do this and do that, and mental health and gun control and so on. So last week I addressed a little bit more the gun control, or 2 weeks ago, and I put this on the record. I do believe a couple of things, based on my understanding both of Torah sources and just common sense, my personal opinion. I'm just going to say it quickly, although, again, the class was 2 weeks ago. I do believe the following. I do believe that every person should have a right to defend themselves. Others cannot come there quick enough when you're under threat. So you have a right to defend you and your family. That's, I think, a given common sense that you should have. Number two, I do think that if you have a weapon in your home, you have to make extremely certain. You have to be very certain and sure that it is properly protected, stored, hidden, whatever it is, so that it cannot be used to either accidentally or purposely hurt someone else. Number three, I'm just mentioning this as an introduction to the next point because I don't want you to think that this is not important to me. Number three, I do think that the age of someone who could buy a weapon should be raised. That's my personal opinion. That's not a Torah opinion per se, but that's my personal opinion. I don't think that someone I think it should be raised to 21 or maybe even to 24 or 25, other than under certain circumstances where if they're maybe living alone and they need protection. So maybe there should be certain conditions or certain exceptions to this rule. But by and large, especially if you're living in your parents' home or so on, the age should be raised without a doubt. As a general statement, I would say the age should be raised. My opinion, you could disagree, and that's totally fine, but my opinion is the age should be raised. An 18-year-old is too young to have such a sort of deadly weapon in today's environment. Is there room for maybe states to make that decision based on different cultures and given places? Perhaps, but that's getting a little more complicated. I'm saying as a general statement, I think the age should be raised. Number four, I think it goes without say that there should be some strict background checking and analysis of a person's healthy state of mind. That is that should be a given as well. So that's my sort of general position of, for more details, you can listen to the class 2 weeks ago. However, this is not the focus today. The focus today is more to go to the core issue. The core issue, because no matter what you do with weapons, there is a way for people to be violent, unfortunately. And that seems to have really increased in this country. It's really gone up in this country. And the parsha that I just discussed is so apropos. If you're not going to bring to the Cohen, then the result is you're going to have to go to the Cohen because of a serious decline in your home. In this country, unfortunately, we have decided that we do not all, but there has been a conscious decision in many parts of our country, especially in the education part, which is so fundamental to shaping the souls and the character of our kinderlach. And I know I've said this many times, but since we've learned this parsha, I want to apply it. If you're not going to be connected to the Cohen, if you're not going to be connected to a superpower, to a moral code, to a purpose in life, an absolute purpose, absolute right and wrong, unfortunately and tragically, you're going to have situations of thoughts and prayers, which is always a result of violence. If you want to stop that kind of thoughts and prayers, if you want to stop the thoughts and prayers that we all send when, God forbid, a tragedy happens, we have to have thoughts and prayers when all is good. We have to introduce thoughts and prayers and what it represents back to our children, back into society. It's an absolute must. When we have those positive thoughts and prayers, we have the positive interaction with the Kohen, with spirituality, with holiness, with purpose, with God, with holy teachings, each in their in their capacity, in their environment, when we reintroduce that, that's the only way, or that's the most effective way that we will get to the core and to the heart of the issue of stopping the unfortunate thoughts and prayers that come after a horrible tragedy. So that's my thoughts on the issue. That's my teachings on the issue of how to apply a simple line in the Torah. It's a beautiful teaching, and I welcome your feedback. Agree or disagree, I welcome your feedback. Thank you for listening to these words of Torah. I hope you could share it with others so that we could bring holy words of Torah to as many as possible. Have a wonderful and fantastic week.